first, I want to start this panel by talking about this gentleman, PewDiePie. Who is PewDiePie? Okay, well, he inspires me because last year he made between $4 and $7 million on YouTube alone with ad revenue. Now, he doesn't do music, okay, but he has a great name, and what he does is he talks about video games online, and he's very funny. I first saw his face when my son, who is 14, which I think makes up a similar type of audience for his hundreds of millions of views, literally hundreds of millions of views on his channel. But he's, the thing that's really amazing about him is that's what he does professionally. He makes YouTube videos, and he makes, depending on the source, Wall Street Journal said he makes $4 million, but I saw another source that said he made $7 million last year. In any event, it's a lot of money. So we can take his face down. But I like his name, and he is like, I think he is the grand prize winner for making a lot of money on YouTube. But when I look at a list, there was actually a list of about 41 people, and the 41st person makes $1 million all the way up to PewDiePie, who's making $7 million according to this list, anyways. So the opportunities, and we're not going to only talk about YouTube. I think YouTube is a very, very interesting opportunity, and it's certainly with AdSense. And I think advertising has only been available for about 3 or 4 years. When did it start? About 4 years ago? Ad revenue where and you could share with YouTube. Do you know that, David?
Yeah, a little longer, but that's about right.
About 4 or 5 years. So it's really sort of a remarkable opportunity. But there's more ways than that, and we're going to talk about a number of them. But I thought before we start talking about some of these specifics, I wanted to go to Todd, and I thought Todd could give us an overview because anybody who is following the news knows that our entertainment is slowly but surely all going to be delivered by the internet. Are we? Is there any way we can kind of lose the? Oh, are they recording next door? Okay, so they're actually recording a score. All right, well that's kind of cool then.
That's another little Mission
maybe,
Impossible.
It does sound Mission Impossible. Okay, so we are being serenaded. So Todd, I wonder if you could give us sort of a legal overview of what's going on in terms of performing rights, in terms of just the general scene right now. Give us sort of a legal overview.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the good thing is that almost all the money is still in traditional media. That's the good news. Just to give a real quick perspective on just the performance area, which for all of you is an exceptionally important area, both short-term and long-term for yourselves. We're talking about in the United States, about a $2 billion business that comes into ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC. Actually, it's about $2.1 billion. BMI reported $977 million last year. ASCAPs will come out with their numbers shortly, but they're going to be close to $1 billion. CSAC is probably in the area of $170 to $200 million. So there's a lot of money coming in. Just where it's coming from, which will put this area into perspective, the web, at least for the performance side, about $650 million comes in from broadcast, cable, and television. Radio, about $400 million. General licensing, which is bars, grills, live performance concerts, about $200 million total. New media is about $100 million of that $2 billion. So you can see it's a relatively small portion of the pie for the reasons which I'll get into momentarily. There's one aspect of their ASCAP and BMI and CSAC income which is substantial. About $750 million comes in from foreign societies, primarily for U.S. writers' works. Most publishers use sub-publishers to collect their share. So $750 million is coming in from foreign countries to ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC to composers and songwriters. A small portion of that, possibly about 5%, is for online uses outside the United States. So again, relatively small portion of everybody's income out there, at least in the performance world. As you know, as I said, the traditional media is where the money is, but the world of litigation is really shaping where not only the online world is going, but could have a substantial effect on traditional media. The Pandora case has just started with BMI in New York this week. The ASCAP Pandora case ended last year with results not terribly favorable, or at least not what ASCAP and the PROs would have liked to have seen. But these cases in the online world, as all of you know, ASCAP and BMI are under consent decrees with the government. In other words, if they can't come to an agreement with a user of music, whether it's radio, TV, Pandora, Spotify, you name it, it goes into federal court, there's a trial, the judge decides what the fee should be in any given area. That's the simplified version of the consent decree and the rate course. In the online world, all these companies, AOL, Verizon, AT&T, MobiTV, Spotify, Apple, Pandora, they've almost all of them have gone to the rate court because they haven't come to an agreement with ASCAP or BMI. And the rates, unfortunately, have been very low relative to what people are used to in the traditional media world. A lot of these cases have been appealed with not too much success. So short term, the figures that are being collected in this area for composers and lyricists and the publishers are very minor, which has led to a number of major publishers trying to making an attempt to withdraw rights from the societies and license directly all these different type of users. So if you had and this would apply to songwriters who are assigned to these companies, as well as work for hire composers who are assigned to all the production companies and studios that are owned by these particular companies. So that's the short version of where we stand today. As I said, the BMI rate court case is going on currently with Pandora, which could very well end up, I hope it doesn't end up like the ASCAP case did, but the judges a lot of times will follow precedent, and it very well may be. But at least in the online world, I've talked about the ASCAP and BMI on this whole situation, and CSAC, and they are optimistic as to the future, as to the rates, where the rates might be going somewhere down the line. Short term, it's not very good. Long term, at least these licensed services will be licensed, and hopefully the income will pick up. It's not only a U.S. problem, it's a worldwide problem. They're doing better outside the U.S. than they are in the U.S., but that's pretty thumbnail sketch of where we stand right now.
All right, thank you, Todd. So we don't know where the internet is going in terms of our performing rights. And what has concerned me, and I think the SCL and a lot of composers, is if our works are removed from ASCAP, BMI, or CSAC and direct licensed, where do we stand? Now we're not going to be collecting through our Performing Rights Society, where we can call and find out how come we haven't received a check or we didn't get this or that. We're going to be collecting from maybe multiple publishing companies, which to me is a disaster for composers. So we're hoping that the law can be changed, perhaps to permit composers to make one decision, which is who collects our performing rights. At least we could have the writer's share collected through our Performing Rights Society. But the good news tonight is that performing rights are not the only way that composers can make money on the internet. And so we're going to talk about some of those other really interesting opportunities. And we all know there's two types. I mean, you can divide composers and songwriters into two different categories. But for tonight's point of view, I think we can divide into composers who do work for hire work, which means we ultimately don't own the rights, and songwriters, usually songwriters, and sometimes composers who get to retain the right of owning their score. How can you monetize music in either of those positions? And there's opportunities in both areas. And the two individuals, two people here to my left, I met at the Copyright Roundtable last year, and it was really interesting. When I heard what they did, I'd kind of been hearing about opportunities with YouTube, but when they told me about their business models, I was really intrigued. And so I actually ended up signing with David through Rumblefish. So I own some songs, and I'm collecting income through them. So I am currently monetizing some of my music right now, and I've seen some not huge checks, but reasonably lovely income streams that just didn't exist 6 months ago. So I'm really pleased about that. And started me thinking about, well, this would be a really interesting seminar to present to you all because I think that this is a new opportunity for composers, and I want to explore that. So David, why don't you tell me about Rubblefish's business model, and just sort of give us an overview of how you guys work with, I guess, publishers and songwriters, et cetera, to monetize their music.
Sure. So Rumblefish provides a few different services. One of the ones that Gary was talking about is that we will monetize anybody who's a rights holder, right? So whether that's a composer or lyricist or songwriter, or whether that's somebody only holding a sound recording, or could be any number of folks. But if you're a rights holder, we can protect your copyright online. We can represent you in the YouTube system and a couple other places. And that is not exactly a passive job. There's a lot of cleanup and a lot of sort of fixing rights disputes that happens within that system. But that one is separate from us going out and actually selling licenses. So we do that in a few different ways, but we see it all as being part of one larger project, which is increasing the revenue that's going back to the rights holder. If we can sell these licenses, not only is there money on the front end, but in the case of somebody who does own their rights, we can increase how much they make on the back end, because the views are increased every time this stuff is going out. I mean, there's not much video that's made anymore that doesn't end up on YouTube or similar places eventually. So those two work hand in hand. And the third thing we do is license verification. And Jenn's company actually does license verification too in a slightly different way that I'm sure she'll talk about. But for us, we have a key. Basically, it's a code that bounces off our computer system and lets us keep track and make sure that the license is being honored and that the rights granted are going to whom they're supposed to and not to whom they're not. And so the three are all sort of part of this bigger system for us to really try to find every last dollar for artists and other rights holders online.
And talk about Content ID. Content ID is basically fingerprinting music, correct? But you had mentioned something just a few minutes ago that sometimes composers do not actually have to provide the music to YouTube. You can just say, okay, this is the ownership, or that I'm claiming some share of this music. But how would YouTube know what music that is if they hadn't ID'd that music? So at some point, YouTube, which is Google, needs to identify the music. So how does that occur?
So Content ID is the in-house term at YouTube for this system. Other people do content identification in different ways, but specifically with YouTube, it's a system they've built that matches the sound recording against other instances of the same sound recording online and compares it to a file that's held, sort of a reference file, to check it and make sure that they know who it belongs to and they know who to pay. The way that compositions come into play is YouTube will do what they call embedding the composition into sound recording, or in all the sound recordings of that composition. And that lets them make sure that they're paying everybody. It's not perfect because, as you said, there's no file particularly to upload. There's no one wave of the song if it's a composition, but it's pretty good. And a big part of our job is making sure that it's placed with the right sound recordings and that everything has the right data on it so that it can be tracked across the whole platform and other platforms too.
Right, and in fact, if your music is perhaps uploaded by other users, and for instance, the song that I wrote that you're monetizing for me, and a couple of songs, it gets uploaded by dozens, maybe hundreds of users, and I've given permission to everyone, as long as they're not, as I say, as long as you're not selling it, you're welcome to use my music. But as it turned out, that was a good decision, because now there's a lot of people seeing and hearing, seeing those videos and hearing my music. So the Content ID is able to identify my uses of my song over hundreds of other videos that I have no way of knowing who is using my music. But because of that technology, we're able to monetize all that. Now what happens is, prior to monetization, there was no ads with their videos. So if they had a wedding video and they liked my song, there was no, but now when people do go to watch their wedding video, they get a little ad, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. In this case, Gary's composition is matched to one main sound recording that was made that got pretty well known of the song. And as a result, anytime that sound recording appears in anyone's video on YouTube, The system is flagged. The money comes back to us and then goes back to Gary. And it's not 100% foolproof system, but it's pretty good. And on top of it, we're able to go out and do a little bit of manual work as well to make sure anything that was missed is caught.
Great. And Jen, tell us about AudioSocket and how you monetize music. I know you do a lot of micro licenses, and we were talking about that the other day. Can you tell us what you guys do?
Yeah, so we represent both bands and composers for primarily web. And I mean, obviously you guys all know that the rate at which content is created and consumed online is unparalleled. In fact, a stat that I thought was pretty interesting is that in the course of 30 days on YouTube, more content is created now than was created in 60 years of broadcast TV. So, and I know another kind of astounding stat that I had heard recently is that on YouTube, there's over 100 hours every single minute of published media. So, you know, as Todd was saying, I think there's a long way to go to get to where we need to be to actually sufficiently monetize that media, but it's all got to be understood in the scope of what that media is. How many people are watching that media? If it is a wedding video, it's very different than if it's a Mazda commercial. But what we do is we make the music available to both. And we do TV as well, but there's sort of some very large dominant players in that space by the time we got into representing bands and artists. So we built out a music technology platform called MAS, Music as a Service. We launched it initially with Vimeo, and Vimeo is one of YouTube's competitors, but it's an ad-free experience. So they were getting sued because people were finding their music on Vimeo videos. Vimeo said, all right, we're gonna build a licensing arm, and so they built a music store, and that was our initial play into sort of this MAS technology. And since then, we've really been building digital partnerships. Associated Press was the one after MAS, where all of the content that is created with AP, as well as all the people that they license their photos to, they can license music through that licensing arm. Monster Energy drinks, they got sued by the Beastie Boys. They needed culturally relevant content to put into their videos. They didn't know where to go, so they ended up using our MAS platform, sending all of their editors to that to go and sync their music. So that's really what we're doing now, but you can go and you can license it for a personal video too. My husband loves to make videos of our kids, and so he goes to AudioSocket and he pays $2. He does not have the right at that point to use it commercially, nor does he have the right to run any ads on it, but the good thing is you do. So in that event, Rumblefish, for example, we have an administrator, and these guys do this service where my husband puts, you know, a song on a video of my kids, and it's not going to make you a ton of money for that specific video, but at scale, it does make artists a lot of money. And again, you know, to Gary's point, it sort of depends on what that track is. I think maybe Gary danced around the world to it or something like that, but it basically is all about how many views there are. But if you're getting a ton of views across time and space, every single time that's viewed, you will make money. And, you know, like I said, I am optimistic that the royalties will get better. I think once systems like the technologies that we're working on are more and more, I guess, or used by the masses, the less people can say, I don't know where my work is anymore. I call that transparency, trackability, and collaboration. And the more transparency that artists have into where their works are going, the more they can track those works, the more they're going to actually be able to monetize those works. And so I guess that's what AudioSocket is doing, is both making that music available today, as well as implementing a system that is allowing for trackability and transparency moving forward.
And Joel, could you click, it's a link, so and tell us what we're going to see.
Oh, so this was actually just, they had said if you want to bring some sort of media to demonstrate what you do, so go ahead and play, and probably just let it go through the second clip. And this is, quite honestly, exactly what we're doing every day. That was really loud. Someday the buffering may actually be a lot better too. Well, so while that's buffering, this is an example of one of the storefronts we have. We work with young filmmakers where we make music licensing accessible and available through a mass platform to these very young filmmakers that need to understand how to license their music. So we're trying to educate them.
Is this a commercial, or is this just a creative?
This is actually, this is called NIFTY, National Film Festival for Talented Youth, and this is excerpts of their work. And so these are all different films actually just paired up with our music.
And they pick the music, the filmmaker picked the music from your library of licensable tracks.
Right, right. And honestly, we don't even need to go through all this, but the point was, the next one was an example of basically digital advertising agencies are popping up all over the place. These are sort of small shops, not your, you know, Gray and the huge kind of Digitosses, but again, the like content opportunities out there are just tremendous. These agencies are everywhere now, and they're doing ads. I mean, this one is with Nicole Kidman for Jimmy Choo. We just ended up starting it over, but that's okay. Yeah, I mean, the point is there are tons of content opportunities now, and those actually pay well on the front end, and then also we're working on how well they can pay on the back end.
Okay, so that was an ad.
Yes.
And the advertising agency came to you looking for music for their ad. They found something they liked, and then they paid for a license.
Correct.
And so how much would that license, would they pay for that license?
So, I mean, without disclosing exactly what they paid, it literally can be, what we do is we try to automate the smaller licenses, which are licenses that typically people will just infringe. Meaning if it's a small business, historically, those people would just go ahead and use that music, and you would never be the wiser, and they would never compensate you. So what we did is we automated the process and made it very simple for small companies to license great music. So they might pay $100 for a one-year term for a small business. This obviously isn't a small business. They paid a couple $1,000s, and basically they got it for a 3-month term, and then they have options to renew. And so, you know, while a couple $1,000s isn't going to, you know, make a living for you, again, the scale at which these sorts of things are happening is phenomenal. And our Monster deal with Monster Energy, we license a couple tracks a day to Monster Energy because that's how much content they're putting online. And so there's brand channels for pretty much every brand out there now, and all is a big opportunity. And these guys do that same service. So.
Yeah, if I could add one more thing too, I think what Jen said is really right on, that those of us who work in this part of the industry really do feel optimistic about making more money in the future. And there's only a couple variables that go into that. There's obviously the licensing up front, and then there's any money that's coming in on the back end, if you've claimed the rights. Getting the money on the back end is just...
And the back end is performing rights?
It could be performing rights, and it could also be YouTube monetization or another place, you know. There are other sort of nascent ones, but YouTube is the big one.
But if it's an ad, you wouldn't put an ad on the ad, would you?
Well, it's actually up to the ad holder. I mean, it depends. Generally, no. Generally, no.
Right.
So, yeah, there's a lot of different ways that things can sort of pair together, right? You can be eligible for your money from ASCAP or CSAC or whoever, and not the monetization, or the upfront fee and performance fee, or however it works together. It's just the money up front, and then it's the number of views, and there's how much you're making per view, right? And number of views continues to go up, and the amount you're making per view continues to go up, because advertising money is starting to shift into this part of the business. So the big fees that you can get from a major national campaign on traditional media. Those aren't there yet, you know, just as Todd explained. But these budgets are shifting more and more toward things that would appear on YouTube, that would appear on Facebook, these small digital shops. Some of them are becoming medium digital shops, and the dollar figures are going up. And just in the way that Jen was talking about too, getting more material out, getting more exposure, recognizing just the sheer amount of media that's getting made, and videographers and video creators who really want good music. The more we can get music in front of those people, the more the whole system works better, right? And we do similar things in the licensing field, where we'll push out small licenses or medium-sized licenses in cases where it might have otherwise gotten infringed upon, with the goal ultimately of making, like I said before, closing the whole circle, making sure that every last dollar gets accounted for people who own these rights or people who created the music.
Now, what if an advertiser comes to you and they have a specific piece of music in mind, but you don't represent it? Do you then go and license it from the third party, or do you say that's not something we can do? Either of you ever go and clear it through a piece of music through some third?
We occasionally will, but more likely we're going to send you some playlists and say, why don't you check out these artists that we represent, because you're not going to actually be able to license that Michael Jackson song within your budget. And that's usually what happens. People don't know, they have a budget in mind, they don't realize that they can't license a famous track for that amount. So we always try to go the route of referring them to the bands and artists that we represent.
Yeah, I think our answer is similar. We also have the luxury of a really large catalog with great information on the songs. And when we have great information on the songs, we can find these playlists, just like Jen's talking about, that are really going to suit according to mood, keywords, the lyrical content, if there are lyrics, whatever it might be. So yeah, once in a while it's worth going after a bigger one that somebody's requested, but generally we prefer to work on a pre-cleared basis so that we can just get everything done quickly and move on to the next one.
And are there people who are writing music just for your catalogs? Or who are writing original material? Or are they putting pre-existing material into your making it available to licensing?
We used to do more writing for the project type of stuff. Increasingly though, as our catalog's grown, really the best thing for us is just to know exactly what we have. And so we try to keep these strong relationships with the people who are sending us music or compositions, sound recordings, whatever it might be, to have all the information we can and be able to find it readily, to have it in front of our minds when the pitch comes in and we need to make the playlist on the fly.
But are they writing it just for you? Are they just creating like material you go, we need, or how are they generating this material? Is it because you guys, okay, you're producing really cool stuff that keeps getting licensed, keep sending us more? Is that what if someone in this audience or someone listening on the web thinks that is interested and wants to put music into your catalogs? Is that possible? Are you seeking people who might be interested in that? When you listen, how could people take advantage of what you're doing?
Yeah, it's absolutely possible. I mean, I would say that in general, people are not writing just for us. People are writing to write, and you know, we're not exclusive. So within YouTube, only one company can represent a song at a time. But within the licensing world, as you know, any non-exclusive companies can work it together, can work it independently. So we have developed relationships with some of these providers where they really are forwarding it straight to us, just because we have sort of a long-standing deal with them and we've been successful. But I think in a lot of cases, you know, we're happy for them if they find additional opportunities for it, not only because it helps our artists and our providers, but because we're still going to help them make money on the back end through making sure everything's clean in YouTube, which gets some money to us, gets some money through the PROs. So in the long run, we don't mind getting dispersed, but we do want more material. You know, if somebody wants to give us material, we will listen, absolutely.
They can email you?
Yeah. You can do it at our website. You can get in touch with us there. It's rumblefish.com. You can email me. I'm David at rumblefish. Those are the two best ways. You can tweet at us. You can hit us up on Facebook. But generally speaking, most of it would be done by email. And I'm as good a person to start with as any, David at rumblefish.
And by the way, and I'm going to come back to this because I find this really interesting. And I want to talk about the work for hire composer and that is a more complex situation, but it's not hopeless at all. So, because a lot of the music that members of the SCL, certainly a lot of our music is work for hire, which means that we're not the legal authors of our music. Okay, we don't own the publishing. But what rights do we retain, and how might we share in these opportunities? So I want to get into that subject because I know that is of interest to a lot of us here. But I also want to, because you work at CD Baby, I thought not to forget about the opportunities of just basically taking your music and through either CD Baby or TuneCore, which I've used, and having them sell your music directly through iTunes or Amazon MP3. So that's certainly an opportunity for composers, and it would be part of maybe a whole. These things might play together in an interesting way, where you're making tracks maybe more famous and more desirable, and actually bringing people's attention to them because they're seeing it in ads or they're being exposed to it. But well, that's a cool track. And now, if someone does, for instance, see a track and finds the song that's really cool, and they might want to buy it or know more about the artist, is there any way to find out who did the music on these ads, or is that sort of invisible?
It depends on who the client is. I mean, we have a number of clients that credit the artist and an audio second at the end of every one of them, like the Monster deal, they do that. But a lot of times they are not going to do that. However, YouTube is smart enough oftentimes that it actually will surface the name of the artist. So again, if you're registered in that system, then the name of the composer or the artist will actually come up within the description.
Not only that, but iTunes and other similar places, if they have the same track in their system, will in many cases post a buy link right next to the video. If you ever see that when you're looking at a YouTube video, it says, click here to buy new music or whatever. That's actually placed by the retailer. So having it available through an aggregator like CD Baby or TuneCore or whatever can create these extra ways that fans and video makers and everybody can sort of all work together to make sure your music is widely dispersed. Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to people like CD Baby, if you've got the rights, you've got the rights. And unless you're going to be able to do better work licensing it by avoiding that sort of situation, I don't see much harm in it. I mean, I know even APM is putting stuff on iTunes now. There's not a lot of downside to it. You make your 70% comes back from iTunes, and then whoever you're working with takes their cut. TuneCore takes 0% as their cut, although they do take an annual fee. CD Baby takes 9% and gives you the rest. If it's something that people are interested in, yeah, please reach out to CD Baby and TuneCore are both great ones, but other people do similar work. For me, I know some people want to be careful about putting it on a streaming platform. People want to be a little bit reserved to make sure it's going exactly where they want, and I absolutely understand that. But from my time at CD Baby, what I saw is that music that's made widely available starts to accrue opportunities, and there's some stuff that's not worth it. But if you can do it, yeah, I don't see a lot of downside.
Right, and hit songs that have some life, whether it's on YouTube or whatever that people see, that means licensing opportunities that exist only because people are aware of some really terrific piece of music, a song or a PV score, more likely a song. And that's what happened with the songs that you present. I receive licensing requests by email. I don't have a publisher, I'm the publisher, and people just ask me if they can license it, and I've just written a number. I have sort of a basic license, and so that's certainly a possibility, but that will not happen unless you have a song or a piece of music that's recognizable, that people have heard or seen. If you have a YouTube video that has gone viral, that becomes an opportunity for you, but it certainly is a cool opportunity, and I don't know anything about licensing. I've had to do it all myself. Do you ever do the bigger licenses through your company? Do you have opportunities to take songs and maybe get major licensing opportunities?
Yeah, we do. We have a department that does traditional licenses. And when I say traditional, I'm really dividing it between things that can be done online in the way that we do it, also the way that JENN's company does it. And traditional licenses, picking up the phone and hashing out a network TV deal or a major ad campaign or something like that. We do, and the way we're able to do it is by really putting special attention and dedicating those more sort of work-intensive jobs to our providers who have phenomenal material, who are very confident that there's no samples, there's no, they're not a cover, they're not going to turn out to have been public domain by accident, or the kind of things that can happen when you're dealing with the masses. But when we know somebody and we know the material, we can ship out playlists on these much bigger jobs. So for us, it's sort of this pyramid of things where the bottom is money that's coming in from places like YouTube. And then there's these smaller licenses that can be sold online in an automated way. Like Jen mentioned the Monster deal, we have a similar deal with GoPro, the camera company, where they are starting to produce more and more videos. We soundtrack them. And then at the top, we can do that kind of traditional licensing. That's a little more work intensive, so it's kind of a feast or famine model instead of collecting it, all the smaller ones one by one. We try to balance it out by doing all three.
And at what numbers do you start to generate real income? I mean, if someone's getting a couple thousand views, that's not going to generate a lot of income. So where does it, is it hundreds of thousands of views? Is that where do you start to see, okay, here's real money that's being left on the table? So if you, let's say you put some of your score up and you've got, wow, 700 views, that's fantastic, I can make money here, but maybe not so much. So at what point is real money, shall we say, significant enough to reach out to companies like you and say, okay, there's a real opportunity here?
It's hard to talk about real money without knowing exactly what that means. Just because, PewDiePie makes $7 million a year, but some kid who's a musician would be thrilled to get a few $100 a quarter. But I will say that there's a real difference when you start getting in the tens of thousands of views. Because the ad types that are actually placed on YouTube change. And you know how there's a pretty clear difference between a little bubble that pops up and says, click here if you want to buy, off-market Mexican drugs or whatever, and a well-produced, obviously high production quality Lexus video rolls for a minute beforehand. That doesn't happen below 10,000 views. And it happens a lot more as you get up around 100,000 views. But I think anything that's getting up toward that range is worth having someone work on. Make sure there's no conflicts lurking around in the back end that are preventing it from making money. Because if two people are claiming it, no one gets to earn. YouTube holds the money in escrow until it's resolved. Make sure that sort of thing is resolved. Make sure any extra instances of it have been found online, and claimed. I'd say that, but it's such a continuum, and just like we've talked about before, we're still working on getting just the gross per view numbers up. Everybody's still doing that.
As a very generic rule of thumb, sort of on the lower ends before the premium ads show up, I was told by YouTube, figure about for every 10,000 views, it's $2. Is that about right?
We can beat that, but that's not unreasonable.
Yeah. So like I said, that's not where you're getting into sort of the premium views that he's talking about, but you do have to have scale. However, I think what he's also saying that is important to note is there's so often that you don't know your music is being used. So you could have had your music in a video and it got millions of views and you never even made a dime because you didn't know it was there. So that's kind of the point of the Content ID system, is to identify those things and then to compensate the right people. But on that note, I guess something that I would want to warn you guys, actually, how many of you have music in Content ID? Okay, so very few. How many of you have been told to stay very far away from it? Okay, so what I have found is there's definitely a lot of people in the composer space that have been told by licensing reps that they will not rep anything that is in Content ID. And this is the downside of Content ID, and you should really kind of know that there's an upside and a downside to everything. But yeah, so Content ID is the YouTube system that matches your fingerprint with the use of that work somewhere in its ecosystem. So that matching is Content ID, and it's all done through an audio fingerprint. And so the upside is that when it matches, it will make a claim. Unfortunately, YouTube's system is not smart right now, and it can't say, oh, I've made this claim, but it's actually okay this time. So unfortunately, what's happening as well is there's a lot of confusion in this space. And we deal with this every day. He deals with it a lot more because he's adminning millions of works. But you want to be very careful about if you decide to sign some works with Content ID, you need to be very sure that the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed on your ownership and your claim to that ownership. And then you also want to be sure that if there's co-writers, they're involved in that, because otherwise it'll end up in conflict and nobody makes any money. Or worse off is when we get threatening letters sometimes from people who represent either works that use similar loops, or sometimes it's the same work and it's somebody who really didn't have those rights. And so, I mean, there's ups and there's downs, but I guess I would say read and understand what it is you're signing up for. And if you were to go into the Content ID system, talk to the agency, the administrator, ask the questions you want to ask, read the agreements, really understand what it means to you. And if you have deals, as you're bringing up, in place where maybe you're not quite sure if you have the rights to be doing this, I wouldn't add to the chaos. There's definitely opportunity there, I'm sure, for a lot of your works, and then there's other works that really shouldn't be added. So just kind of know where you can and can't play, I guess.
Okay.
And actually, real quick, one more thing on that note. If you sign up with a CD Baby or a TuneCore or an Orchard, oftentimes in very small print, it will say you will be opted into Content ID. And I don't know if they still have the systems the same way. It's caused a ton of problems. So I don't know if they're still just opting you in if you sign up with their service, but they used to. Do you know if they're automatically opting people in now?
So the Orchard is, unless that's excluded from the contract. TuneCore historically has done that. I don't know if they're doing it right now. CD Baby has been a good actor about it. I'm happy to be able to report that you have a very clear option in the sign-up process with CD Baby. They class it, as do many people, as a sync right that you're granting, but it spells it out that this would include monetizing on YouTube. So I think Jen's exactly right. People do need to be careful, and when things get signed up, multiple different platforms, multiple different websites and services, just keep an eye out. You know, I mean, just like she's saying, there's things where you do need to be careful. If you've issued an unwitting exclusive of some kind. But
so if TuneCore is, let's say, you're getting that in the small print, does that mean then we can't come to one of you guys and monetize it?
Right, exactly. And beyond that, it will, if you don't know that they're administering for you, they're probably not going to tell you. I mean, agencies that big who, I mean, TuneCore is, what, 10 million tracks, something like that. They're so big that they don't care about you individually. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't mean to say it that way. They're so big that I don't think they have time necessarily to let every individual know that those assets are in conflict. So we often have situations where the work we're doing is actually sync licensing. So we're licensing works. They're distributing works, but they have assumed this right of sync licensing on YouTube. So it comes into conflict with our, when we license to Jimmy Choo, the first thing that happened on that video is it got a claim by the Orchard. and so now all of a sudden we have to go over and have these conversations and tell them to release it because our client's upset. So again, remember, the claim system is unforgiving. It will just blanketly claim because it's all it knows how to do. It's a fingerprint, and we all hope that that system is going to evolve. These guys have built a technology that takes it to the next level and begins to systemically release those claims. But right now, consider it to be an action without intelligence. It's just an action. It's a fingerprint, it matches, it takes action, period.
But if TuneCore did then present that Content ID to YouTube, are they monetizing ads with that money, and then are they paying the writers?
They are monetizing the ads in that event. this is honestly one of those things where I'm telling you guys, and I'm not speaking about TuneCore because I don't really know much about TuneCore's
But the
arm.
Orchard does this.
Be very careful. I mean, know who you're dealing with and know if they're actually doing right by you. Because I think that I can say for both of us, I know I've talked to his colleagues, we see bad administrators out there, and they're not paying the artists, and they are claiming that revenue, and half the time the artist doesn't even know that they're claiming it on their behalf. So, and they make it difficult to pull your music out of it.
I think just to give some ray of hope, I would add that if you are signed up for distribution, just call or email your rep. They will let you know if this service is actually being enacted on your material. And the other thing I'd add is that there's really two different classes of kind of negligent administration. One is not paying you, right? That's theft. Another is something Jen alluded to, which is just lack of maintenance. In a system this big with a lot of moving parts, it's important to keep an eye on everything. It's important to make sure things stay out of conflict, that if there is a little part of the video that has a different song, that'll be excluded and all that stuff will be maintained properly. And I think maybe a bigger problem on the whole than even people just keeping the money is people neglecting works and letting them fall into these situations just because $100 for them, they don't care, So
is what you're saying that if we want to use your service, we should tell TuneCore we don't want to assign them the same right? We should exclude that we use the TuneCore or any of the...
Or the Orchard, yeah. I have my song is with TuneCore, but there's been no conflict. So that may not be so much an issue with TuneCore. Maybe it's a more recent issue with TuneCore. I don't know. But we haven't had that issue come up.
Yeah, I think in Gary's case, we decided to give it a shot and see if it went into conflict, and then we'd negotiate on his behalf, and it didn't. I mean, that's kind of the disorganization at these institutions that you can face sometimes that you need to be wary of. Sorry.
I was going to say with TuneCore, you actually have to go into the system. Even if you have a YouTube publishing deal with them, you still have to go in a separate screen and check the track that you want that to administrate for you.
Good.
So you can kind of sort of have it both ways.
So it is an opt-out as opposed to it is an opt-in, not an opt-out with TuneCore?
Even if you've already signed up for the deal, which I have, but I still have to go into the extra screen and check the track. And someone would say, you have a licensed track.
That's great. That's really good to hear.
Jonathan?
Yeah, just follow up on what you said. There's two sides to TuneCore. One is distribution, the other is publishing administration. And I think that's where you get into the issue of the conflict.
Yeah, that's something they started a couple of years ago, and they've been, they advertised to me because I have tracks with them. There is something that they do that's potentially interesting. When people listen to tracks on iTunes or Amazon and sample them before they make the purchase, that is a use of the music. I don't believe that iTunes and Amazon are paying for that use, but in foreign territories, do you know anything about that, Todd? That those uses when they're sampling, just listening to the track on iTunes, because I think you can listen to like 60 seconds, up to 60 seconds now, and just, I believe that you can collect for foreign, there's a foreign performing right opportunity there, but you can't, but is ASCAP collecting for any of that, or is it, do you know anything about that?
Yeah, but basically what's happening when you're dealing with samples, that actually came out of the AT&T ASCAP rate court case, which is actually the one rate court case that I was involved in, where the judge actually ruled that the previews were not fair use, which AT&T claimed, and that they were licensable commodities. So yeah, previews are licensable. There are agreements with Harry Fox and others as to you can use 90 seconds without a fee or anything else, but they are licensable.
Do they generate a performing right?
Yep.
And does ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC collect those in foreign territories or not?
The foreign societies are collecting in foreign societies, and through the reciprocal agreements with ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC in the States, they are being collected for. Practically anything, the rules outside the U.S. are much better on the online world than they are in the U.S. So just, almost everything performed over there is a licensable. Plus, in many cases, there's a download right. There's a mechanical right and a performance right in almost any stream and any download, which is not the case in the United States, nor is it in Canada now. So that's a major difference right there.
And let me ask, how many of you are members of Sound Exchange? So a good percentage. Could you talk a little bit about that, Todd, Sound Exchange, what they license and where composers and songwriters can take advantage of that?
Yeah, you know, with Sound Exchange, anybody who's an artist or a background musician or a background vocalist or is a record company, owns a record company, would be foolish not to join Sound Exchange. There's no fee. Basically, Sound Exchange was started in 2000. It became independent, I think, in 2003. It was originally the RIA, founded it. I think it shows you where it's come from. In 2005, they had $20 million in distributions. Now remember, the distributions go to 50% goes to the record company, 45% goes to the featured artist, which would be the composer if the composer is a conductor, and 2.5% each goes to background musicians and background vocalists through SAG and AFTRA. So that's where 100% payment of every Sound Exchange payment goes to those four entities. In 2003, they collect the distributions $20 million. In 2014, they will be distributing $773 million. And this is only for a very limited right of three things: Sirius XM, non-interactive streaming, which would be Pandora, and the cable channels which play music. Music Choice is the perfect example. Most of the money is coming from those three entities. So it's a huge amount of money, and they distribute statements. There's a 4.5% admin cost because it's very little, costs very little much money to run this thing. And if you're not a member, and they also have agreements with foreign societies which handle the same right. Major problem here because it's PPL in England, it's RACS in Canada. Every country has a organization that collects on the sound recording performance right. Because it's a limited right in the United States, it only applies to the three areas that I just mentioned. Doesn't cover traditional radio, doesn't cover traditional television, cable, broadcast. They're exempt. So what happens is, because of these reciprocal agreements, U.S. artists, record companies, and musicians and vocalists are losing possibly $100 million a year because foreign societies will only remit to Sound Exchange a reciprocal right. So since the right is so limited here, all the foreign societies who collect from radio, television, cable, and everything else will not send that money to the United States because the U.S. does not have, it's a very limited, very selective right, and it doesn't cover traditional media. But it's a great organization, and each year they're getting better. There's currently a webcasting 4 hearing going on right now, which will determine the rates for 2016 through 2020. So I do recommend you pay attention to that webcasting proceeding, which is the Copyright Royalty Board, because it will determine what the fees will be in those years upcoming. And if you see the kind of growth that's happened in just those 3 areas alone, I mean, it saved record companies, and for artists, it's been a real boon. And they issue statements quarterly, which are quite detailed.
I want to talk about work-for-hire composers, which is a lot of us. How many of you are mostly work-for-hire composers here? So a good percentage of us, and that would be most of my work as well. What does that mean? That means that you're working for a film production company, television company, game publisher, and you're basically signing a contract which assigns all the rights to them. In exchange, you're being paid for usually some fee for composing the music, and almost always, in 99.9999% of the cases, you're given 50% of the writer's share of the performing rights income stream. In addition to that, you're given, usually, you're splitting the publishing royalties of some kind for record sales and other ancillary income streams. And so what we're talking about here would certainly fit in the ancillary income stream. So, David, you and I were talking about this. What opportunities, let's say you composed the music for a hit television series in which the music's popular, and it's all over YouTube, it's playing a lot, and people are putting it up with adding your music to their, when I say your music, you've written the music, though you don't necessarily own the publishing. So it's all over the place, but your publisher, the people that have hired you, really are not monetizing it. They're not receiving any ad revenue. How could a composer take advantage of that without, getting in trouble?
Yeah, sure. I want to give a couple quick caveats. First, I'm not a lawyer, so if you have law questions, maybe Todd can help. But because this does start to verge into legal questions. And the other one is, if you have explicitly granted this right, and new contracts sometimes will include that clause, you should be wary. You should not try to exploit a right that you've given away. But in a lot of contracts, they're silent on the issue, or they'll say something like, what Gary's referring to, ancillary, other uses, something like that, are to be split 50-50, and it might not even clarify who's going to administer on that. So you have a couple options at that point. If the contract is silent on the issue or seems to suggest that you're eligible to exploit the right, you can do one of two things. You can get in touch with that publisher and ask them to do it. You could get in touch with the publisher and offer to do it for them, with the understanding that you're going to remit their 50% back to them. Or you can wing it, if somebody comes to us and says, I don't have the right to exploit this, but I want to do it, we have to tell them no. But if somebody comes to us and signs paperwork that says they really do have the right, and they're in good faith acting and assuming that they do, maybe they've gotten some legal advice suggesting that they have the right to earn this money, then we're going to take them at their word, and we're going to expect that musician or composer, whoever it is, to pay any other parties what they're obligated to do. YouTube is a little bit of the Wild West still. First one in is usually the one who's going to win the conversation when it comes to claiming videos that contain this music. So while we try to be really careful that we're acting in good faith, and while we see other people who sometimes don't, I think it's important that when it's up in the air, it's worth looking into. It's worth giving it a shot in one capacity or another. The other thing I want to add is that as a work-for-hire composer, there are other opportunities that come along with this whole realm of digital stuff. I think what we're seeing is that something called multi-channel networks are getting much more popular. These are basically record labels for YouTube channels. They get a bunch of YouTube channels together, they help cross-promote them, they put the ads up, they have ad sales teams. Those guys need music. We're seeing people like PewDiePie, who are YouTube or Facebook or Vine or Twitter celebrities in their own right, and they might need music too. And I think it's worth keeping your eye on that as possible other sources of income as the ad money continues to shift in to this area and people have a little more. Then there are, especially at the top of the pile, people who need quality music, who need maybe their own theme music, things like that.
Gary?
Yes.
I've been hearing a lot of partial information.
Yeah,
I've been hearing a lot of some misinformation, I believe.
Well,
I don't know at what point I should try to.
I'm gonna bring you in because I think I'm gonna bring in Bill right now because it's a really good time. Bill Goldstein, of course, has written a lot of television music, and he was on a panel some years ago, and he talked about some really creative things that he has done to monetize his music. So, Bill, why don't you talk about what you've done, and if you have some thoughts on what you've heard here, please tell us.
I'd be happy to, but before I do that, I need to go back to some of the things that my colleagues over across the aisle have been saying.
It's us versus them.
Yeah, not actually. So, is this working? Okay. So, tell me about the term you're using for when the music that is uploaded gets an audio fingerprint that is then identified.
Content ID?
Content ID, correct. Yeah. And you were saying that if your music is content ID'd, then you're giving up certain rights to it, if I understood what you were saying.
It's being matched.
It's
So in the content ID, are you talking to me?
Yes.
Or Ida, whatever. So content ID is when the fingerprint is matched on the YouTube.
Yes, I know what it is, but in terms of the rights, I thought I heard that if you your music was content ID'd, then you could not do other things with it.
Oh, no, I'm saying content ID cannot, in the content ID system, it doesn't recognize rights that have been granted. So if I gave Jimmy Choo a right, even though they have the right to use that, the content ID system is still going to make the match and claim that as if it hadn't been licensed.
Okay, all right. So, all right. Just to put everything in the context of what I'm going to say, you have to understand that I've been thinking outside of a box for a really long time. I'm a composer like you guys are. Fate has put me into some really odd situations. In terms of the technology, in 1985 I ended up becoming the first humanoid to record a musical score on a computer for film or television. I ended up beta testing the first MIDI interface. That score came out on CBS Masterworks, and the YouTube video of the Entertainment Tonight interview is on YouTube. And then 2 years later, I did the score for the first video game that had a score. It's called King's Quest IV. I also ended up being a Motown recording artist, and then I was an artist on CBS Masterworks, so I've covered a lot of bases. Now, I realized early on that the owners of the music, since we are composers and working for hire, had no interest in exploiting any of our music. And early on, I started trying to license back. In other words, go to the people who own it and said, if you allow me to put out a CD, I'll give you X amount of dollars. And I put out about 7 CDs before everything started going digital. And I had my own sub-distribution deal, and I was in all the record stores. And it was really nice to go through the stacks when there were record stores and find your CD and, you know, put it in the front or something like that, you know. Okay, and so then the world started going to digital. And I had an assistant who told me about a company in San Francisco called IOTA. And IOTA was really terrific, and because I was with IOTA, I've ended up with The Orchard. And The Orchard is the best thing that's ever happened to me. Better than Motown, better than CBS Masterworks. The Orchard made me a YouTube partner immediately. So if I go to my YouTube channel and we're under analytics, it tells you how much I'm making. It tells me I'm making $10. Except I'm getting hundreds of dollars a month just from YouTube through The Orchard. And one of the things that was discussed is that somebody uploads, you know, an episode of music or a movie that you have music in, and nobody's trying to collect it. But if you put out a soundtrack to that movie, and it gets online and it's with The Orchard, that music will all be captured from everybody who's uploaded that episode. The Orchard just takes care of it with YouTube. I've seen this time and time again. I've seen, oh, who put this up there? And then I look at the video, and on the bottom of it, it says, oh, and you can get the music, you know, on iTunes or Amazon, and it's got my album. So what I started doing is to go to all the majors, and I've been making precedents. I was the first person to go to Sony, I think it was in 2008, and say, hey, I want to put out the music I did for the TV series Fame. Will you license it back to me? And they said, well, we've never done that. And I said, I don't care. You know, you've never done that. This music is sitting there. You're not doing anything with it. Let's do something with it. And I made the first precedential deal with them. And then I got them to give me back my CBS Masterworks stuff. And then I started going here and there. Right now I've got close to...
Bill, when you say give you back, I mean they literally...
Give me the rights.
The rights, okay.
I pay them. I pay them all.
And you pay them based upon when you receive... You don't pay them anything up front.
No, they ask. Oh, right. They ask.
Right.
Oh, boy. They ask and they ask. No, I don't give them anything up front. Not only that, in some cases, where they say, okay, we'll let you do it, but if we decide to do it down the road, we want you to take yours down. I said, that's fine, except you're going to have to pay me a few $1,000s at least for the mastering time and for creating this thing that you would not own, that you might not even be able to find the music to if you wanted to put it out. And so I've got some of those deals. But basically, I started licensing. So yes, they own it and I license it. And the average deal is 10%. Disney, of course, takes a hell of a lot more than 10%. And I even did two deals with CBS at 5%.
So meaning you keep 95% of the money and they get 5%?
95% of what's left, not the gross, the net, after iTunes takes their 30%,
right.
After the Orchard takes their cut. Whatever I get, they get 10% of. And when I started, it was all downloads. And now it's almost all streaming. I'm happy to tell you that I've been averaging over 500,000 streams monthly for a long time now, and it keeps growing, and it's quite remarkable. So the thing is if you have a score that you like, license it from whoever owns it, get it up online, and when you get it online, if you're with an aggregator like, I don't know how CD Baby works, I don't know how you guys work, but if you get it online with somebody who's got a relationship with YouTube, like the Orchard has, I mean, for instance, I just closed a deal with CBS. Actually, the deal memo's closed, but it's not signed yet, but the album has already been delivered to the Orchard. I'm putting out 3 classic scores I did in the 80s for the Twilight Zone, and for 5 years, CBS said, no, you can't do it. No, you can't do it. No, we won't let you do it. We're going to do it. We're going to do it. We're going to do it. And about 8 months ago, I called Les Moonves's office, and I didn't speak to Les, but I talked to his assistant. And then a few weeks ago, I actually found myself on the phone with the president of CBS Network, Dick Staff, and I said, the episodes that I would like to put my scores out are on YouTube. Not only are they on YouTube twice, but one episode, 20 different people have put them up. 30 different people have put up another episode. All this stuff's there. You're not getting any money from it. I'm not getting any money from it. What's the business model here? And so finally, not even grudgingly, they said, okay. So March 17th, my Twilight Zone album comes out. And that means that when that record comes out, that the Orchard will start collecting from all of those things that are up. My biggest seller is The Miracle Worker. And The Miracle Worker, because Disney, this Disney movie is on YouTube all over the place, and Disney hasn't taken it down, I'm getting a huge percentage of my income just from The Miracle Worker, not even from the sales of my album, but from the YouTube videos are up there because I have an album and because my album is there and my album is linked. You listen to that,
that's the content
I get the
ID.
money.
That's the content ID. Your music is fingerprinted, and it's finding it in the movie, and it's paying you.
So yes, the point is, though, with the content ID, if you license back from whoever owns it, you legally have the right to have the content ID. And basically, I'm seeing more of an income stream that I ever saw as a Motown artist, that I ever saw as a CBS Masterworks artist. And once you establish your deal in the world we're living in now, not only can you license back your stuff, but if you wrote a string quartet, you want to put it out. I did an album with Jim DePasquale here, a fabulous album, and you should all buy it because it's not selling like it should. It's called In the Moment, and it's unique and it's brilliant. And so you want to put something out? Once you have your distribution deal, you put it out. You don't have to manufacture CDs anymore. So there's no expense. If somebody wants a CD from you, it used to be they'd get in touch with me and I'd make one. Now I just tell them to go to Amazon, and Amazon On Demand will make a CD of any score that is out there. So your minimum expense is just your time to create something, master it, turn it over to a distributor, put it out. And it used to be, when I was a Motown artist, that a release was domestic and maybe one foreign territory, and maybe if it moved a little bit, they'd move it to another foreign territory. Now I release something and it's worldwide, period.
Todd?
Sorry? The Orchard has me worldwide. Yes.
Todd, I want to ask you a question. We were talking about this earlier. What language should a composer ask their agent, or if you're doing your own deals, or if you have a lawyer?
To agreements.
Todd,
Yep.
wouldn't you think it's better, instead of splitting 50-50, that you go to whoever owns it, license it from them for 10%, and then give them, 10% of what you collect at the end of the day, which will be more than the 50-50?
Well, yeah, no, the problem is if it's a work for hire agreement, if there's no Schedule A or no mention of it, you don't have any rights. So, that would assume that the composer does have some rights. This clause would at least confirm that there is, if it is monetized on a site by the publisher, who's the copyright owner in these cases, that at least the writer gets a share. It's like a typical Schedule A that all of you sign, which lists all they call them songwriter royalties, even though you're composers, and list all the different sources of income. It's interesting because it ties into the direct licensing issue, which I'll expand just a little bit on that since you brought up here. I've been dealing with the direct license issue since the 1980s, early 80s. You remember this with CBS.
Yeah.
They put language into composer agreements that dealt with if a station didn't have a license with ASCAP, BMR, CSAC, or if they wanted the license, they requested the license directly, then they had the right to do so. And under work for hire agreement, you're a complete right to do so. Now, in a lot of the contracts that writers finally start getting, they'd have some clause in there if something was directly licensed, which think about what's happening with the possible publisher withdrawals from the PROs. If thing is directly licensed, that the writer gets something, they either 50% or negotiated in good faith, or various other clauses that are common in those agreements. But again, it's important to have some type of clause in there covering specific areas. You'll have a general clause a lot of times, but I worry about that, particularly for YouTube and the online world, where first of all, it's difficult to figure out monetization. Despite the fact things are being monetized now, thank God. But for composers, it's a different world because of the work for hire contract, and better have something in there that covers you, or you're not doing anything. One last thing, I'll mention the Harry Fox agreement, which with publishers and stuff, again, as to monetization of YouTube. But for authorized videos, publisher, first authorized, the publisher has to agree to this. The publisher gets 15% of the net ad revenue, and the record company gets 35%. YouTube gets the rest. If it's a user-generated content situation, publisher gets 50%, and YouTube gets the rest, because there's no master recording involved. Under the agreements with a writer, the writer should be getting half of that, whatever the publisher gets. So I throw that out as just another example of the monetization of YouTube and other sites.
Todd, let me clarify something. Todd is talking to you about writing royalties and publishing royalties. What I'm talking to you about is if you license an album or the music from something and you put the album out, you are the artist and you are the producer. So in addition to the songwriting royalties, which are sadly a pittance, you will get the rest of the money as compensation as being an artist and as a producer. So that's why you'll make much more than you will just if you're thinking small as the composer. You license your music and then you become the star.
No, Bill, I think that's so brilliant. I think really creative of you.
You go to iTunes or Amazon and you put in William Goldstein, you'll see 50 albums pop up. And Universal Music is licensing or issued two that they won't license back to me. One is my Motown work. They put out the best of William Goldstein, surprise, surprise, because it turned out in 2008 that some 20-year-old kids discovered some of my old records, and they were getting thousands of hits on YouTube, and the next thing I know, I get a call from Motown. Hey, we're doing a best of album, and I had to ask, well, what's a best of album? So they have that, and they have Bingo Long, which I did at Universal as my first studio movie in 1976.
And basically,
else I've licensed back.
Your pitch basically is to go to them, look, nobody's making any money on this music now. It's
Right.
sitting fallow. It did its original job, but there's opportunities here, and I would like to make some money for myself and you in the interim. And they basically, after some
Right,
time,
and I will tell
eventually-
you, don't be shy and don't take no from the lower executives. In 3 or 4 instances, I had to go talk to the presidents of company. I talked to Bruce Resnikoff, who's president of Universal Music. At Sony, I had to go, I threatened and would have called the president of Sony and said, why don't your people want to make a deal that will bring money into your company? Do you think your shareholders want to hear this from your, you know?
Right, because very often the lower level people do not have the power to say yes, they just have the power to say no. So
don't take no for an answer.
Jen, I have a question for you. I remember when in our conversation, you were talking about the difference between monetizing Vimeo versus YouTube. And can you talk about how they differ?
Yeah, so Vimeo, if you go to their music store, you're basically paying to license the music up front. And then obviously there are, well, actually no, Vimeo has an exception. It's not currently monetized on the back end. But essentially, their sync store, you pay a pretty small amount because they only license for small business or for personal license. And then if you want something with expanded rights, you actually have to come direct to AudioSocket. And Rumblefish is in there now and a couple of other vendors. But YouTube is essentially doing it all on ad sales, where Vimeo is doing it in an upfront way. So it's just a different approach. And it's sort of, I guess if you're one of those artists whose songs ends up getting widely viewed, then you're better off with the ad approach. And if you're not, then you're better up with, you know, with the $99 or $199 small business licenses.
Yeah, I think something Jen and I probably both say is that optimally you get both. You know, I mean, you're not always going to,
yeah.
but either because you sell such an expensive license up front that they very clearly state you're not going to be able to collect on the back end, or because somebody has just basically grabbed the music and stuck it on a video. But I think what both our companies are trying to work toward is a place where people do pay a bit up front, and then if the circumstances are right, you can still make it on the back end in case it gets 20 million views or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Any questions in the audience here? Yes. Can you go to the mic, because we have people listening on the web.
Sure. So as a content creator on YouTube, you put a video on. You've got your original content, which gets ad revenue. Can you clarify the difference between the money that comes in for the actual video versus the music that's being licensed for that video? Is it part of that pie, or is that a separate stream pie? Because I'm just confused about it.
And there's a hierarchy, as we discovered.
Yeah, I think hierarchy is exactly the right word. The general way it's arranged is that whoever put it up has the first ability to monetize it if they want to. They can just check the box and say, put ads on this. And then due to settlements YouTube has made and some business rules they've made in response to, you know, lawsuits and threats and stuff from the majors, music has the ability in many cases to take precedence over that video claim. So YouTube, generally speaking, you know, varies just like he was talking about with HFA, but generally speaking is going to take a little less than half of the ad money, and the rest is up for grabs. And music is oftentimes, I don't want to say all because it's complicated, but it's oftentimes able to supersede the claim of whoever just posted that video, if they are just some guy with his own channel, you know, or some person putting up her sports highlights or something. You know, if she uses your music, the music.
David, I'd like to add to that if I might, and that is, once I put an album out, I usually go and I put a YouTube video up promoting the album. What that means is that I've already established a video with my music in the album. So not only do I own all that video, but that also gives me more power on YouTube to collect all the other money that's going to come in from the use of any of that music in anybody else's videos. And then I find a lot of my videos end up on other people's playlists as well. So that's another source of
generated
income.
a precedence
Yeah.
by putting it up there first.
Yeah, and so they're put up initially to promote the album. If you go to my YouTube channel now, you'll just see a couple of days ago I put up a Twilight Zone
That's right
promo
It's right there. Should we?
Don't waste the time with the skimming. You can look at it at home. Let's just talk. But yeah, right. Thank you. You know, it's cute, but I mean, you know, what? Yes, I did. I actually used clips, and the writer of 2 of the 3 episodes, who was also a story editor, Alan Brennett. I'm having lunch with him on Monday. He just, you know, I love doing video editing as well. It's a lot of fun. It's scoring a film backwards. You take the music and then you just
How do you not get claims against you by the studios? Because
nobody cares. Nobody cares.
I have, anytime I put, Disney especially, if I have, even on a private channel on YouTube, put a clip from one of my films, they block it. Even on a private channel, yeah.
Well,
As
I've got
long as
my
there's
clips
video
from the Miracle
content,
Work. I've got Disney stuff online. They don't bother me. I don't know. Maybe it's because I've got the albums out and they realize it's a promotion for an album. I don't know. But I'm not bothered by Disney, and I hope I remain that way.
We'll watch tomorrow. It'll all be down.
Yeah. No, but I'll tell you something very interesting. I did a mini-series for NBC a number of years ago called Zoya, Daniel Steele's Zoya. And I put up like an 8-minute clip from Zoya with really wonderful music, and it was helping promote the thing. And it got, I don't know, about 16,000 hits. For me, that's pretty good. I think the most I've gotten is about 140,000 on something. But anyhow, a year and a half ago, I see that Zoya is taken down and there's a claim against me, and I call NBC and I say, what's going on here? They say, oh, we didn't do it. Daniel Steele's lawyer did it. Daniel Steele doesn't want anything. They took everything down. The whole Zoya movie was up there. And I talked to her lawyer and I said, this is really stupid. She said, well, Daniel Steele doesn't want it up. I said, yeah, well, she can't stop my music. No, your music, but you can't have those pictures. So what I did, Zoya is a story that starts with the Russian Revolution. So I went back and I took exact archival footage from the Russian Revolution and I put it together that, and you can see Zoya now with the actual Russian Revolution stills and film footage on YouTube. And if you go to my channel, I'm on my website, they allowed me to keep the original Zoya video with the footage on my website, and you can compare the two. And the one that I put up with the archival footage is doing much better than the other one. So thank you very much.
I think I hear a book coming out of you right now. Tips and tricks behind the scenes of YouTube.
I'm looking for a publisher. Thank you.
So the recommendation is
come up
use
to the microphone
PD
if you have
for
questions.
PD archive stuff. Use PD archive stuff.
Yeah.
I have 2 scenarios for content creators. Someone puts up a video of just talking and they're monetizing it. And now they put up a second video, they're talking and they compose some music, they put their own music in their own video. Does that second video create more revenue or not?
No, go ahead.
Generally speaking, it's going to be the same.
So I think this is sort of another way of asking his question, that there's one chunk of income and some of it gets shaved off for music if the music's present.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if the music's present, the music is going to do better than a lot of the other material. I mean, there's a million details, but it's basically one slice of the pie that's available.
Thank you. This is very interesting. So I've got a video game came out last year, and it was a work for hire. And assuming I can get the publisher to go in on something like this, what then happens? Because I've gone and looked, and a lot of the tracks have been uploaded 20, 30 times. There's like hundreds of thousands now, between all of the tracks of views. and I haven't seen any money, so I'd like to. How do we get ads on those things?
So first thing I'd say is the views that have already happened, that money's likely gone. And I wouldn't get hung up on it because it's generally not held by YouTube and escrow unless there's a really good reason to. And if they
there was
have
no ads anyways to pay them any money.
Right, but even if there had been, you know, like it is what it is. Once you do, if you can, get the deal with the publisher, once you do get the music in the system, it'll start reaching out and claiming these pre-existing videos. Anything that goes up after you put the music in the system is going to claim automatically. Anything that went up before could take up to 6 months to get claimed. That said, if you're working with a firm like ours or like one of the other ones who works directly with YouTube on this stuff, we can go manually claim them. We can find them for you, or you can tell us where to look, and we can make sure that they're claimed as soon as possible so that every time somebody clicks through or watches one of those ads, it'll work from that day forward.
And if his publisher or developer just says, "Oh, we don't really care. We're too busy to deal with that," but doesn't affirmatively give him that right, then he could still come to you and monetize?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I always say is like, yeah, check with a lawyer. You know, you've got the contract you've got. But if you get the go-ahead, there's not a lot of danger in it. You know, the worst thing that could happen is somebody could ask you to take the claims back down. It's not going to be that big a deal. Rarely are you seeing giant lawsuits over this kind of thing.
But if you, I mean, I think what Bill does is right. I mean, I cannot see if you have a relationship with a developer or a publisher or you know, a company that owns their own publishing and they maybe make films or television shows. If you go to them and say, look, this is money that's being left on the table. Let's share it, and I'll take care of all the bit. All you have to do is open an envelope and deposit a check every now and then. Can you handle that much responsibility? And I would imagine most of the time they'll say yes. Right.
Yeah, I was wondering if anyone knows how the PROs are deciding who gets how much money or anything, and if there's if you happen to know that you've got a bunch of music or music in videos or just music itself straight off the CDs that are out. If informing your PRO, or giving them a list of of places to go and see how many clicks or whatever have happened, if that's a way to, I don't know, how do we decide? Because I've seen on my statement, general internet unresolved, so, you know, it's a really small amount of something. So yeah, I wonder if
you know what, and I don't know if this has changed, and maybe Todd knows, because I remember I had this one song that had 50 million views, and I was expecting a nice check from ASCAP, and I got nothing. And so I called a couple of my friends over there. I go, I don't understand. You guys are talking about your YouTube and you know, deal and all that, but I haven't. This is 50 million. Doesn't seem like, it seems like a pretty significant number of views. And what they said was, the problem is that YouTube does not report performances other than for the big music companies, the big, so that's really, they don't care about the little guys like me. Even though I had a lot of views, I wasn't a record company, and therefore, and I wasn't a big publisher, so they weren't really reporting my performances. So I brought that to ASCAP's attention, and I then did see some, but they literally had to go, okay, yeah, we know you, Gary Shyman, so that had an advantage. I could get to the people who knew, who could make a call or two, and then I saw a special payment for it, but it's still not generating money automatically unless I still have to kind of like nudge them and say, hey, so it's a problem. It is a problem, and I don't know if any of you guys know anything about that.
Yeah, it's just kind of better, Gary. You know, focusing on Netflix and Hulu, and then deal with YouTube. With Netflix and Hulu, which really are concerned to all of this particular community, there's I think about a 99.9% is actually tracked that comes in on these monstrous files. The problem is that where there's Q sheets involved, it's fine because they will be paid. I mean, keep that in perspective for a second. There's an aggressive move by ASCAP and BMI, and I'm assuming CSAC, to aggressively go after these Q sheets that are missing. Okay, that solves part of the problem if you start getting everything identified. The main problem is the amount of money coming in from these services at the moment, based on the rate court decisions and some negotiated deals, and the amount of the volume of performances. There are billions of performances, so there are thresholds and cutoffs where you're going to see it. You could have performances out there. They can be picked up and surveyed by ASCAP and BMI, but you will not receive a check at all because you haven't hit a minimum threshold of, I think it's a penny at BMI, I think it's a credit at ASCAP before you see anything. Then there's accumulation of monies until you reach a certain point before you would actually get a check. It's better if I recommend direct deposit because the smaller amounts you will get those amounts, unless if you're not on direct deposit you won't. So for the film and TV community and video game community on it, the same rules are in effect as in cable, network, local TV. There's theme versus feature versus background score. There's different distinctions based on type of use as far as values. There's audience measurement. That's not in place, obviously, in the internet. It's just number of streams. So it's the volume of performances divided by the amount of money divided by your particular type of use translates into very little money right now. One quick example, Gary mentioned it. Here's like a YouTube. This could be ASCAP or BMI or CSEC. 114 million streams, $15,000 writer and publisher. That's at least a decent amount, but 114 million, come on. The good thing is...
That's a lot of views.
Yeah, but the good thing, the positive aspect of this whole thing is that all of the major services are licensed by the PROs. Amazon's really the last one. ASCAP just made a deal for the AV aspect of Amazon. They're still dealing with the song aspect. BMI's in negotiations right now with Amazon. So you may not like the rates right now, but at least all these services are licensed. Hopefully in the future the rates will be better. The problem is the volume is just too huge no matter what the rate is. One last thing, the good news also in all traditional media deals, whether it's network, local TV, radio, cable, they now incorporate the online world within those deals. They're not separate deals anymore. The website and the mobile usage is all included in the traditional media deal right now, which is good. So at least they're recognized as part of the main structure of the traditional deal. But unfortunately, they're all licensed. That's the good news. The money so far is not great. It's better outside the U.S.
I want to add to that, if I might, and that is, again, if you will go to the trouble of putting out an album from your TV, your game, your movie. When I do this, I don't take the titles of the music from the cue sheet. I give them new titles on the album that make sense, and then I register those titles with BMI. I do it with BMI, and you know it's part of the same movie. But then you've got 20 more titles from the same movie, and you're getting more. So when I look at a BMI statement and I know that for this quarter I got X amount of money from the orchard and I get this small pittance from BMI, but the small pittance from BMI is the writing, my writer's share. But because I put the album out, I'm the record label, I'm the producer, and I'm the artist, and so I'm getting all of that money. I mean, you know, it's just coming to me because I did a little extra work, but it's all coming to me because I'm a composer and I wrote music, and I'm licensing back from the people who own my music, you know. And so I really encourage you all to take control of your lives, which you can do today. You couldn't do that when I was starting out. I mean, you know, when I was a Motown artist, that was a really big deal. When I was on CBS Masterworks, I thought, oh my God, this is incredible. I'm on CBS Masterworks. And outside of an advance, I never saw another penny. And even when the Best of William Goldstein came out in 2009, I was an artist on Motown in the late 70s. They said, by the way, you know, you probably won't see any money for a while because you're in the hole for about $60,000 for session costs. And I said, well, certainly you must have written this off, you know, so many years ago. Oh, well, we probably did, but we still have this agreement with you.
Bill's point is a very good one, actually. It's a reminder that there are multiple rights in every transaction, so if one may be very low, you really need to put your efforts into exploiting the ones that may make you some money until the other ones hopefully come up to where they should be.
Right. If 100 million views is earning only $15,000 in performing rights, what would 100 million views be worth in AdSense? So that'd be
100 million views is a lot. I would say, a few grand.
only a few $1,000s.
Yeah, I mean, you know, somewhere, it varies a lot depending on how it's all set up, but, you know, probably not a lot more than $10,000.
Okay.
Yeah, you can break the math down, and I think this might be helpful for folks. Like, if you get 100,000 views on YouTube, the last time I heard the performance rates, and Todd may correct me here, but the last time I heard it, that was worth about a third of a credit, so that was like $2.50. 100,000.
Just the writing share.
Yep.
And 100,000 views in terms of ad monetization might be, $50, $100. Maybe not 100 if it's just the writing share. If you're talking about licensing to a commercial that's liable to only hit 100,000 people, that's a pretty small commercial, right? That's either really local TV or that's maybe something that's just for online, but it's still going to be worth probably a little more than the other two are going to be worth there. The goal, I think, that William has accomplished and that, you know, Jen and my companies try to accomplish is to make sure we're getting whichever one of them is available, hopefully more than one. I want to encourage you all to try to find cases where you may have overlooked a right or two that you have, or that you might be able to gain one again, either in partnership with your publisher or your label, whoever it may be, or on your own terms working with companies like ours. I think there's always going to be stuff out there as technology continues to accelerate that people won't catch the first time around, and whoever's going to be there looking for it is going to find it.
And Jen, as you were saying on the phone the other day, the opportunity is in the volume. It's just about aggregating all this music over a number of years for a composer, songwriter, and monetizing it in multiple ways, micro-licensing, ad, performing rights, and all these can now continue to generate regular incomes for music creators.
Yeah, and there's a lot of advancements happening right now in terms of the technologies, again, that give you the ability to track and have the transparency. And as those evolve, so will your monies.
All right, another question or two, otherwise we're...
Well, I'm not clear about with Jen and David, your companies. Are you libraries, publishers, distributors, or administrators that take a percentage?
So we're different. Audio Socket is, we license music, so we have a roster of about, right now we're at about 50,000 tracks. I think you guys are maybe a couple million.
Depends how you count. That would be the biggest number you could say.
Okay, so we're a little more of a boutique, I think, operation as far as licensing goes. We have an audition process. I actually told Gary, if any of you guys do have catalogs of music that you'd like to audition, via this evening, you can come direct to, send it to artists@AudioSocket and mention that you are here, and we will bypass the audition process because it's actually quite lengthy. It takes a long time because we get a lot of auditions in. But we are very, very selective in what we're taking on. We're not trying to really grow the roster a lot at the moment. We're trying to really bring value for the artists that we are representing. So I think we're trying to keep it a little smaller. We're not adminning, which is what Rumblefish does. But we do put our music into Content ID so long as everybody has the rights to have it in there. And then we share it just the same way they do. It's just that we don't provide that role, they provide that role.
Yeah, I think that's pretty clear about us. The only thing I'd add is that we sort of, you'd probably term us two different things depending which context we're working in. We do offer sort of features like a licensing library, and then when it comes to the YouTube stuff or related things, we're an administrator that takes a small cut.
And what kind of tracks would you say you're looking for? What would be the most valuable? Are they pop music? Are they, score? Would scores be interesting? Trailer style music? What's really, what are you looking for?
You know, right, it shifts over time, of course, just like for everybody, but right now, scores are really successful for us because we found a couple new venues to do some of this small-scale licensing. We're working with Shutterstock Music, which they've added on in addition to their film and TV business and their still business. Got into Vimeo, just like Jen talked about, and really we're finding that a couple of our smaller, high-quality production houses are doing the best of anyone in those places, which makes sense. You know, it's just people who want a soundtrack. It's not so surprising that somebody soundtracking, you know, their video about their trip to Thailand would want something similar to someone who's, you know, actually making a movie or a TV show. But we're pretty wide open. The big trick for us, just like I said before, is it has to be good, right? And we do have an audition process, although ours is pretty direct. And again, David at Rumblefish, if you ever want to send anything by. But really what we need is excellent, clear data about it. And we might refer to it as metadata when we talk. We're going to want you to list some moods for us, some genres and subgenres, things like the tempo, things like the lyrics, all that kind of stuff, because that helps us find it in our system, and that helps other people who might want to license it find it in our system, and it helps YouTube monetize it properly in our system. So if we've got all those things in place and the music's good, we're interested.
Charles?
Yeah, Gary, this is a great panel. You can tell because we're all furiously taking notes out here. So many questions, but I'll keep it down to two. One is, this is the first time I ever heard the word soundtrack used as a verb by David. You said we soundtrack them. One question is, does that mean you actually take the product and track it, or do you just license the music? That's one question. The other is a little something about where ad rev comes into the equation. Thanks.
So when I said soundtrack, I really meant enable people to put a soundtrack to their video. And we work with a few different parties, so it happens a few different ways. You know, when we work with Animoto, for instance, we provide some of the music that they offer to people who are uploading videos, and in their software, people can edit and put it all together. In other cases, they're just selling a license, you know, on Shutterstock. So it varies how they're applying the music, and we have a few different methods sort of depending how you get to us. Second question was about AdRev. AdRev does, basically they do the part of our business that Jen's company doesn't do. Is that a fair way to say it? AdRev just does the YouTube sort of management stuff. And we deal with them a little bit too. We like them, you know, they're good guys. They don't do the licensing portion of it, but they are really active in the YouTube portion of it.
All right. Well, I think if there's no more questions, oh, one more question, okay. Okay, two more questions.
Just to clarify on Content ID, because you say be careful about having it. You guys use it in your businesses, right? So
yeah, we do.
So are we supposed to avoid those deals because if you Content ID something, then we're screwed in other places? Or I mean, that's a little confusing the way.
It's being really clear about the rights that you have or the rights you don't have. When it gets confusing is when you don't have rights that you think you might have, or maybe you're just testing the waters. That can get very confusing because things can sit in conflict if somebody has claimed that they have those rights. So you want to make sure you have the rights, number one. And then my point about companies that assume those rights without letting you know is that that's problematic for us because we've also submitted it to the system. Rumblefish may have submitted it to the system. So when people are putting it in there and you're not aware, which we see all the time, A, you should know where your rights are going and who's representing them first off. And B, nobody will make money, they will sit in conflict. So what YouTube deals with confusion by not dealing with confusion. They don't run ads, nobody makes money. Does that help?
You know, the one thing I would add to that is keep track. You know, keep track on a given song what rights you've given away and what you haven't given away. And if you need to check, just check. It should never be much more than a phone call or a couple of emails to find out if a given right is out of your hands or not. And it's absolutely worth knowing because whichever ones you still got are valuable in one context or another.
And in fact, you may be able to negotiate those rights back, as Bill has pointed out. You may have given up those rights, or it may be nebulous and confusing. The contract may not speak directly to that issue, and then you might want to clarify with the owner of the music, if it's a work-for-hire situation, and say, okay, here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to make money for you and me on these tracks that are currently not earning income through this venue, and it just seems like it's a win-win.
Yeah, my track record since I got the Twilight Zone is now 100%. Nobody's said no to me permanently.
It's a win-win. It really is. Yes.
If you're writing music not exclusively originally for a web series on YouTube, how can you license that through AudioSocket without the content ID coming back to your creators? And I understand that's probably something that has to be worked out with YouTube's ID system before.
Do you own the publishing?
Yes, I've kept everything for this nominal fee for the series, licensed to AudioSocket, and then the series creator is like, hey, what's this company bothering us? So I had to withdraw content ID from AudioSocket.
And that's exactly what I'm talking about. So because content ID only matches and blanket claims, it does not have a way to say, oh, but don't claim it on this specific use. That's the problem. So unfortunately, this isn't AudioSocket's issue or Rumblefish's issue. This is an issue that YouTube, I think, just hasn't gotten to yet, let's say, where they're very aware that it's a problem, that we can't validate your rights, and that's exactly what he's talking about with the RAD key, is the more people that begin to participate in the RAD key program, the more we will be able to call out that you have a license, and therefore you can leave that in Content ID and make money everywhere else. But it doesn't exist in YouTube today. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, that's the scalpel we're hoping to develop. Right now, there's just sort of the big hammer method, where you turn on, you turn off. One thing I'd say about it is, in specific circumstances, if it's gonna work for everybody, you can do what's called whitelisting a channel, which means setting aside that channel as not to be monetized by our catalog or AudioSocket's catalog or AdRev's catalog. We don't like to do it very much because it means everything we control is not going to monetize when it appears in that channel. But if it's just a small thing, you know what I mean? If it's one specific web series and that's all they've got up there, something like that, there are cases where we can do it so that you can monetize the other stuff. It's a maybe. You know what I mean? It's a complicated answer to that one.
It's sort of how YouTube has tried to manage the situation, but what he's saying is 90% of the content could be infringing, like they may not have a license, and we would never know because we've whitelisted the channel. We've said, okay, anything that goes on there, we trust it. And that's the problem, is the other rights holders may never make money where they should have. Yeah. It's confusing, believe me. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of people like, what? And that's how I think we feel about it too, because also things change constantly in YouTube. I'm sure Rumblefish has done it, but we've gone through the certification, and even they will tell you, this is a constantly evolving thing. Like, things are changing constantly, they're evolving constantly, and that's because we're in the infancy of web. So as all of this is evolving, including copyright law, I think you're going to see a lot of changes happening, and hopefully we're going to come to a place where it's just stable and the flaws get worked out and the system is just cranking. But right now, there's still just a lot of mystery, and
it's a Wild West.
It's a Wild West, big time, yeah.
But the cool thing about the Wild West was you could go in and rob a bank. No. The cool thing is that there are opportunities now for us to really take on our own initiative to find opportunities. Maybe you're the next PewDiePie. And you write some original music for and find someone who creates original audio visual content, and you create a channel that is generating really major views, and you're finding income. And as new as all this is, as we were saying before, there's probably someone somewhere in the world thinking of some new way to use the internet that's never been dreamed of before, that will also use your content and need your content. So you need to keep aware of it, and you need to find these opportunities. And it's a very exciting time in that respect. I know that there's a lot of things that composers and songwriters find to be depressing about. But at the same time, there's these opportunities, and that, in fact, may be more exciting than anything in the past. So it's a really interesting time, and I want to thank my panelists very much for bringing a really interesting